On April 27, 2026, Iran's foreign minister landed in Saint Petersburg. The official framing was diplomacy, a routine meeting, bilateral coordination. That framing is wrong, and if you accept it, you'll misread everything that follows. What Abbas Araghchi carried to Russia was not a request for help. It was a proof of concept, a demonstration, delivered in person at the table with Putin, that the system they have been building together for the past decade is now operational. And the Strait of Hormuz is how they proved it works. I'm Stephanie Taylor. This is Strategic Review. And I know the visit got about 30 seconds of coverage in Western media. That 30 seconds missed the most strategically significant diplomatic event of this entire crisis. So let's go through it properly, because what's being built here, piece by piece, corridor by corridor, payment rail by payment rail, is a parallel global economy, one designed to function without permission from Washington. And it is further along than most Americans understand. Stay with me, because this isn't a story about Iran. It's a story about what happens when the countries that control the world's energy, the world's shipping lanes, and the world's raw materials decide together that they no longer need the system the United States built after World War II. Let me start with something most people have never heard of: the International North-South Transport Corridor, INSTC. 7,200 kilometers, from Russian ports on the Baltic and Caspian Seas, down through Iranian territory, all the way to Indian ports on the Arabian Sea. A cargo shipment that takes 6 weeks by the traditional maritime route through Suez can travel this corridor in 18 to 21 days. That's a 40% reduction in transit time. Costs drop by up to 30%. For years, this corridor had one missing link: 160 kilometers of unfinished railway between Rasht and Astara in northern Iran. 160 kilometers. That's shorter than the drive from New York to Philadelphia. And for years, that gap was enough to keep the entire system theoretical. In April 2026, Russia and Iran signed the final executive agreement to build it. 1.6 billion euros split between Moscow and Tehran. Construction has begun. Now let me tell you why this matters beyond logistics. When that rail line is complete, Iran becomes the indispensable land bridge between three of the world's largest economies: Russia, India, and China, and the Indian Ocean. Goods, energy, raw materials, all of it can move overland, beyond the reach of any navy, beyond the reach of any blockade. Think about what that means. The Suez Canal gets disrupted, as it did in 2024 when Houthi attacks cut transit by 57%. The Strait of Hormuz gets contested, as it is right now. And the INSTC just keeps moving. Trains don't care about naval superiority. The trade numbers already reflect this. Russia-India bilateral trade hit $68.7 billion in the 2024-2025 fiscal year, 5 times what it was in 2021. And here's the detail that should make every Treasury official in Washington pause. Up to 96% of financial settlements between Moscow and New Delhi now happen in rubles and rupees, not dollars, not through SWIFT, through national currency pairs and alternative payment rails. Sanctions didn't isolate Russia and Iran. Sanctions gave them the business case to build what they'd been talking about for decades: the UN Security Council veto, the Mir Shatab payment linkage, the INSTC Railroad. These aren't separate initiatives. They are a single, integrated system designed to function without permission from Washington. And the more unstable Hormuz becomes, the more valuable every kilometer of that land corridor gets. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you next is where the geography of this conflict becomes impossible to misread. And it's the piece that the political framing of this crisis has been working very hard to keep you from seeing. Pull up a map. Start at the top. The Arctic, where Russia has invited China to share its northern coastline. New commercial shipping lanes opening as the ice melts. Move south. The Baltic states. Drone attacks on Russian territory traced to or transited through NATO member nations. Keep going. Ukraine, where between 60 and 80% of Ukrainians want the war to end, according to internal polling that doesn't make Western headlines. Further south, the Caucasus, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and at the bottom of this arc, Iran, the Strait of Hormuz. This is not a collection of separate crises. This is a single pressure front, and at the other end of that front sits China. China imports 11.1 million barrels of oil every single day, the largest crude importer on the planet. Approximately 37.7% of that oil, roughly 5.4 million barrels daily, passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran alone supplies about 13% of China's total needs, roughly 1.4 million barrels per day, sold at discounted prices under a 25-year strategic partnership signed in 2021. So when the United States bombs Iranian infrastructure, it's not just hitting Iran. It's squeezing the energy artery that feeds the world's second-largest economy. But here's what makes this more complex than a simple pressure play. China saw this coming. By early 2026, China's strategic petroleum reserves reached between 1.2 and 1.4 billion barrels. At current consumption rates, that's 108 to 130 days of complete autonomy, even if every maritime route were cut simultaneously. No other country on Earth has that kind of buffer. Japan has about 230 days of reserves, but far less total volume. South Korea, around 110 days. India, 10 days. 10. And China didn't stop at reserves. It built pipelines. The Espo pipeline from Russia, networks from Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, a strategic transnational pipeline through Myanmar, from the port of Kyaukpyu to Yunnan province, pumping 70,000 barrels per day, bypassing the Strait of Malacca entirely. These are continental supply lines. Submarines cannot interdict a pipeline that runs through mountains. Hold that thought and look east. Through the Taiwan Strait passes 21.2% of all global maritime traffic. $2.45 trillion worth of trade every year. Taiwan produces over 60% of the world's semiconductors and controls 92% of the global market for advanced logic chips smaller than 10 nanometers. So here's the map that actually matters. Hormuz is oil. Taiwan is chips. The Strait of Malacca is trade. Ukraine is the land front. The Baltics are the attempt to open yet another theater against Russia. 5 pressure points, 1 strategy. And the question nobody in Washington seems willing to answer honestly: Can you hold all five simultaneously? Because while the U.S. Navy concentrates assets in the Persian Gulf, the Western Pacific gets thinner. Every carrier group steaming toward Hormuz is a carrier group not positioned near Taiwan. That's not opinion, that's arithmetic. Now let me show you the cost equation, because this is where the mathematics of modern warfare become impossible to ignore. An Iranian Shahed drone costs between $20,000 and $50,000 to produce. A single Patriot interceptor missile, approximately $4 million. A THAAD interceptor, $12 to $15 million. The cost ratio between attack and defense reaches 1 to 300,000. Iran can produce drones on assembly lines. The U.S. cannot produce THAAD interceptors on assembly lines. The manufacturing cycle for advanced interceptors takes years. This isn't just a battlefield, it's a war of financial exhaustion, and the clock is ticking in Iran's favor. Stay with me, because what I'm about to walk through next is the part of this conflict that Washington's communication strategy is working hardest to obscure. And it directly involves you, as an American, as a taxpayer, and as someone who buys gasoline. Let me give you the economic scenarios. These aren't projections. They're calculations based on known reserves and known consumption rates. 7 days of disruption. Panic pricing on futures markets. Spot prices surge to $100 to $110 per barrel. 14 days. LNG delivery schedules to Asia break down. The market realizes no quick resolution is coming. Oil climbs to 120 to 130. Energy-intensive plants in Japan and South Korea begin precautionary shutdowns. 30 days. Physical, unrecoverable diesel and fuel oil deficits across Europe and Asia. Commercial reserves exhausted. Prices breach 150 and keep climbing. Global recessionary spiral begins. Double-digit inflation returns. And then there's the detail that deserves its own investigation. Iran's transit toll system. Approximately $1 per barrel of cargo transiting the strait. For a standard VLCC supertanker, that's roughly $2 million per passage. Potential revenue, $20 million per day from oil tankers alone. Up to $800 million per month when LNG carriers are included. But the payment method is the real weapon. Iran requires transit fees to be paid in Chinese yuan through the CIPS system and Bank Kunlun, or in digital assets outside U.S. jurisdiction. Not dollars, not euros, yuan and stablecoins. Every transaction is a micro-erosion of the dollar's monopoly on energy trade. Now watch India. Because India's position tells you everything about how the New World actually works. India's strategic petroleum reserves cover just 10 days of domestic consumption. The country is one of the fastest-growing major economies on Earth and catastrophically vulnerable to any disruption in Hormuz. So what does New Delhi do? It balances, exquisitely, ruthlessly, and without sentiment. India maintains its technology partnership with the United States, a counterweight to China. Simultaneously, it preserves its relationship with Russia, cheap oil, defense systems, and it deepens its engagement with Iran through the port of Chabahar, which connects India to Central Asia and Russia via the INSTC, completely bypassing Pakistan. The result? India was officially designated a friendly country under Iran's new Hormuz transit system. Indian flag vessels pass through the strait safely, even during active hostilities. India buys Russian oil in rupees, invests in Iranian ports, participates in American defense exercises, and chairs the BRICS summit, all at the same time. That is what sovereignty looks like in 2026. Not loyalty, leverage. Now let me bring it back to Washington's actual position, because I've been parsing the language coming out of the administration carefully. And here's what I see. They're looking for something that looks as good as the JCPOA, the Obama-era nuclear deal, but dressed in the language of Trumpian victory. They've quietly abandoned the demand to eliminate Iran's ballistic missile program. They've stopped talking about the other preconditions they once called non-negotiable. What they want now is a nuclear agreement they can hold up to the cameras and say, "We got a better deal than Obama." The substance matters less than the presentation. Because here's the political reality. The 2026 midterm elections are approaching. The polls are moving against the administration. If this crisis isn't resolved by September, the energy shock alone could tip a recession into a depression. America needs a spectacular victory. Iran just needs to not lose. That asymmetry, that single strategic fact, shapes everything. The Iranians, if they're smart, and they are smart, will detect exactly what Washington needs and find a way to give it to them without conceding anything of real strategic value. They'll agree to a deal that lets the president stand at a podium and declare triumph. The strait will reopen, the oil will flow, the world will move on to the next crisis. But the world that emerges from that deal will not resemble the world that existed before the bombs fell. Because while the diplomats negotiate over uranium enrichment percentages, Iran has already demonstrated something far more consequential. A regional power with $20,000 drones and sea mines can hold the global economy hostage. That lesson doesn't get unlearned. So let me give you the full picture. A 160-kilometer railroad in northern Iran is being built with Russian money. When it's finished, it will connect Saint Petersburg to Mumbai by land. No canal, no strait, no navy required. A toll booth in the Strait of Hormuz is collecting fees in yuan. Every transaction is a micro-erosion of the dollar's monopoly on energy trade. A country with $20,000 drones is bleeding the defense budget of a country with $15 million interceptors. And the math doesn't reverse, no matter how many targets you strike in the first 12 hours. A bloc representing 40% of the world's economic output and 56% of its population is meeting in India to discuss how to build financial infrastructure that doesn't route through New York. Up to 96% of Russian-Indian trade already bypasses the dollar entirely. That's not a forecast, that's a fact on the ground. These are not separate threads, they are one tapestry. Hormuz leads to oil. Oil leads to inflation. Inflation leads to elections. Elections lead to policy. And policy, or the absence of it, leads back to Hormuz. Meanwhile, sanctions push Russia and Iran toward INSTC. INSTC enables de-dollarization. De-dollarization strengthens BRICS, and BRICS provides the diplomatic cover that makes all of it sustainable. None of this guarantees any particular outcome. Empires have weathered worse. Alliances have fractured over less. The variables are too many for certainty. But here is what I can tell you. The world that exists after the Hormuz crisis of 2026 will not resemble the world that existed before it. The logistics are different. The payment systems are different. The alliances are different. And the next choke point, the one that controls not oil but silicon, not energy but information, not 20% of the world's fuel but 92% of the world's advanced semiconductors, is already on the map. Hormuz was Act 1. The question is not whether there will be a second act. The question is whether anyone is prepared for it. This is Strategic Review. I'm Stephanie Taylor. If this analysis helped you see the pattern, share it with one person in your network who's still reading the headlines and missing the architecture underneath. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next transmission.